Hello, everyone. Welcome to our panel on queerness in Cape Town. Yes, go ahead and clap. Thank you. My name is Lwando Scott, and I will be chairing today's discussion. I use he, him, they, them, and I have been known to respond to hey girl as well. So I'm based at the Center for Humanities Research at the University of the Western Cape, and I am and I love all things queer and African. I'm looking forward to this discussion this afternoon. I've been looking forward to it since I said yes. So thanks to Frankie, thanks to the Book Lounge, thank you to everybody who's been involved to bring the Open Book Festival to life. What a thing it is to come together, to think together, to disagree together, right? In this small corner of this difficult yet fabulous continent. We have a fantastic panel this afternoon who will draw on their experiences of living and working in Cape Town and just generally their understanding of queerness in the city. In fact, yesterday, while I was buying books to add to a list of unread books, they said to me, you know, they're interested in the conversation today because they used to go out in the city in the 90s. So now if someone is going out in the 90s, you can only imagine how old they must be. He said to me, you know, he's from Wynberg and that he's looking forward to this conversation because when he used to go clubbing, he used to come into the city and then he would leave in the early hours of the morning, taking the first train out. And it struck me, though, as we were having that conversation, that he was somewhat mourning a Cape Town that's no longer there. He was kind of mourning that this Cape Town that he used to love in some ways, that is no longer there. And I suppose there are many reasons for that. So before I get carried away, which you must all know I can't get very carried away. I'm just the chair, huh? And this is not my show. Okay, well, maybe a little bit. And somebody who knows everything about shows, our first speaker, I want to introduce the middle. Oh. The middle person first, because Miss Diva performer, this panel member we know as somebody who's a performer, always copied, never duplicated, drag queen extraordinaire, Manila von Teez. And you know, this is someone who has won all the pageant titles. I mean, if there is a pageant, she has won it.
No, I haven't won Miss Western Cape yet.
Okay, so one. Her talent has been recognized on all kinds of platforms, including South Africa's Got Talent. I have to say, she was a runner-up on that show. But my favorite thing is an anecdote, and I don't think I've shared this with you, Manila. But when I was in LA last year, while walking the streets of West Hollywood, I went up to Morgan McMichaels and had a chat. If you know Drag Race, then you know who Morgan McMichaels is. And as we were chatting, of course, I was asked where I was from, and I told them that I'm from Cape Town. And then they proceeded to ask and to tell me that they know Manila and how talented and fierce she is. So when I think of Manila, I think of someone who's really part of the culture, part of the queer culture of the city of Cape Town. So help me welcome Manila.
I have goosebumps, thank you.
So our other panel member is Zoey Black, trans activist extraordinaire. Zoey Black is probably the quintessential 21st century woman with a hyphenated job portfolio. She's a YouTuber, hyphenate, filmmaker, hyphenate, human rights activist, hyphenate, an actress trained at the University of Cape Town's drama school. Zoey has a very successful YouTube channel where she has tracked her transition journey. I encourage everybody to go check that out because it is a wealth of knowledge about what it is to transition in this city, but also in this country. The channel is simply called Zoey Black, so you can take a moment and even Google now. But Zoe has also published, contributed writings to, They Called Me Queer. And I see in the audience there are some other people who've contributed into the book, Janine, Kelly, and yours truly, of course. Zoe has also contributed to Trans Rural Narratives, published in 2020, and Keeping the Promise of Dignity and Freedom for All, both of which are available PDF online. So if you want to learn more, again, Google. Our final panel member this afternoon is Maneo Mohale. Yes. An editor, a fierce feminist writer, a poet. Maneo won the 2020 Glenna Luche, I'm not sure if I'm getting that right, Award for African Poetry for the debut book of poems, which is called Everything is a Deathly Flower. And if you do not have the book in your possession, do yourself a favor and get it. I did hear from the previous session that it might be sold out, so you yeah, you might have to. Inspired by people like Makosazana Xaba, Maneo, you have delivered an exceptional book of poems. I love how Kopano Maroga writes about this book. I quote, the work of, where am I? Here I am, okay. The work of Maneo Mohale is a family affair, an invitation to, an invocation of so many of their far-spread kith and kin of Black and queer and femme lineage. Through them, how many voices they invoke and invite and take a seat at their table, whether to eat, to make merry, or to sit in silence and deep breathing. Mohale has made a space for as full a spectrum of emotion and experience as one body can contain in a single sitting. Poetry as illumination. Okay, so clearly we have a great, great panel, and but this is a book, Beyond the Mountain, which is a collection that speaks about Africa's gay capital, Cape Town, and Manila is also in this one. It is archives from
back in the day.
Yeah. The first installation of Zero, I think, right? The first Zero. But I want to read just a little bit in the preface before I ask the first round of questions to our guests. So this book so this is a preface to a preface, right? Cape Town's gayness is exclusionary, stifling, and alienating. As a result, while there are many lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and intersex groups and organizations, there is no queer movement. In the absence of such a movement and organizing, concerted efforts are necessary to bring a diverse group of people together to enable queer narratives to emerge. Intersecting racial, gender, sexual, and class realities pave the way for oppression, transgression, and subversion to surface in profound ways when groups of individuals who believe themselves to be marginalized along the same lines gather. And then there's a line here, which I think is very important for the panel because all of you are artists. A queer analysis in Africa cannot exist outside of activist engagement or artistic representation and engagement. So the first thing I want to ask is, to all three of you, what do you think, or what comes to your mind when you hear queer, Africa, Cape Town?
Don't look at me.
Well, must I go first? Well, for me, I think I got to kind of find myself. When you think about queerness and you think about Cape Town or Africa, in a sense, you think of a lot of struggles that everyone goes through our whole continent, in essence. But having to grow up in a time where you could feel love, you could see love, and acknowledging and seeing that for me was the biggest eye-opener to be me and present myself in such a way that I have to spread love too. And whenever I have a show, I always tend to think of, we all go through things. But when it comes to my shows, I want to take an escapism from that. I want to teleport you into just feeling something completely different. And when I think about Cape Town, Africa, queerness, I just think of we have so much joy, we have so much culture, that it sometimes holds us back from loving, because we have to present ourselves so strong all the time. And that is sometimes very difficult for many of us. And I feel like having to constantly have a wall up for wherever you go, wherever you meet people, it's sometimes disheartening to yourself, because oftentimes you're not able to be yourself because you have to go into the world and present what they expect you to be and not who you are.
I don't know how to answer this, because maybe I do, because I think it's maybe a little bit profoundly personal for me. So when I came out, that was a really, really hard time for me. One of the things that we know, like humans, like we like to see ourselves like reflected in narratives, in stories and stuff. It's how we understand our identities, it's how we understand our relationships, it's how we understand ourselves, right? So when I came out, and this was, oh my God, 2015, 16, maybe. The time does this for me, right? And so when I came out, I was trying to find people like me here, and I found nothing. Sure. And that's not to say that there weren't trans people in Cape Town. There were, but the visibility of people like me was like almost non-existent, right? And I found that profoundly difficult. And because I'm me and I needed to process my coming outness out aloud against the sounding board, I had to create that-ness that wasn't there for myself, right? I remember coming out and finding people, finding content, finding writings, finding videos, movies and stuff. Europe, United States, maybe Australia, lovely. But nothing very here, nothing very African, nothing very visibly African, and visibly Cape Town and visibly South African. And so I had to be that person for myself. And then when you say, like, what does it mean to be African and queer? Like, I don't know how else to say it, but like, it's me. Like, because I had to create that space for myself. Like, because it wasn't there for me when I was coming out, and I wish I had that. So it's interesting when you were reading that sort of little opening thing. I was like, I don't know how I feel about there not being a movement and not being an identity. Because I think we're in it right now, you know? This is what's coming to my mind when you ask the questions.
I think the way that I tend to ground myself in anything is like through community. So like, it's wonderful that you read that really wonderful excerpt from my baby girl, Kopano Marocha's review of my first baby. So like, that book for me is a lot of what represents queerness in Cape Town for me. I think about B. Kamenga, I think about Zetsu Matebeni, and like as my first sort of grounding, sort of, 2015 and 2016 were such intensely political years. I'm thinking about the fallist years and the movement, and I think that was when I was asked to reckon with queerness and class in this city. And as a poet, it was the first time people like Koleka Putuma, who was incredibly visible at such a pivotal time and speaking back to Cape Town's virulent whiteness. And suffocating whiteness. Like there's the stereotype that we can sort of rest on that, you know, the white cis gays and the pink mile and beefcakes or whatever. But like,
Snap.
but when I think about queerness, Africa, Cape Town, that's, for me, I think about the UCT Trans Collective.
Yeah.
I think about Sandy Lendelu, Nyla Ross, Mlingani Matiwani, who also this piece, my piece in that book, is a review of a film that Kyla Phil, an incredible filmmaker, also a trans person, did, and it was a short film about the UCT Trans Collective called No Milk, No Honey, No Safe Space. And when I think about those are the people that were really mapping out what it was like, what it felt like to live and travel and leave Cape Town and also be at UCT, which was at the time kind of presenting itself as the bastion of sort of liberal thinking. And Black, queer, and trans, but specifically I'm thinking about the UCT Trans Collective, completely flattened that myth for a lot of us that needed that myth to be flattened. So yeah, I want to kind of bring those names into the room because those are the ones that's how I think about queerness in Cape Town through others and the way that they were articulating. And I'm glad Zoe saying that, you know, there is a movement now. And we were just talking just before we started speaking that the dolls that are coming up now are like big and visible and hot and clouty. And I think that there's very interesting things that are happening, but not without their tensions, like their classed tensions. But I think there's something happening right now, which I think we can draw a line to that 2015, 2016 moment, which was the collapsing of the rainbow once again.
Right. I mean, picking up on that, you know, there's I don't know to say a continuous conundrum, I guess, which I think this book is what it's trying to get at, right, about Cape Town and the way it is marketed, perhaps, and the discourse around it as the capital, right? Because that invites all kinds of things, right? When it is you know, talked about as the capital, and so at once, right, it is seen as, you know, some of the things that you describe, you know, marketed in this particular way, but then people experiencing it in a very different way, right? Alienating, you know, white cis, as you mentioned, beefcakes. And so, I mean, I suppose, but I also struggle with, you know, there's a discourse, which I understand where it comes from, about Cape Town being a white city, right? But I tend to be a bit ambivalent about that, or want to push back, because white to who, right? And also white where? Right? Because if your circle is Rondebosch and Kemps Bay, then maybe.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right? Because when I was at a drag show in Joseph Stone, I didn't see no white people there.
Because
Right.
they're scared of Joseph Stone. No, I'm just
But you know what I mean? So I wonder if you could speak a bit about that, because that conundrum, if you want, lack of a better term.
Yeah, it's funny because I constantly have this like conversations with so many of my friends who live like either in town or in the southern suburbs, right? I think for so many people who live there, like all your stuff is there, so there's never a need to travel beyond that, right? I grew up in the northern suburbs of Cape Town, so I spent a large part of my time either traveling in by a train, bus, then eventually driving, right? So I got to see Cape Town and I really enjoyed driving, right? But for so many of my friends, none of them had like veered past, like Century City was like the limit. And then they were like, oh, there's like more Cape Town beyond this, right? So when people talk about Cape Town being white and the queerness in Cape Town, I'm like, what Cape Town are you talking about? Like, which part of Cape Town are you talking about? So if you never like veer outside the context of the southern suburbs and the CBD, you don't get to see the rest of Cape Town, which is significantly larger than this little tiny pocket where we're sitting right now. So I always say to people, like, bruh, they are like clubs. Like the queers also like exist that side, you know? We're not like all chilling here and it's like, oh, it's so white here and it's so privileged here and and it is to a certain degree, but there's a whole other Cape Town as well.
Do y'all want to take that in any shape, way, or form?
Well, it's like you said, there is spaces that everyone can be, and you see like people of different cultures, different races in one space. But then you go to other spaces for, like, I want to mention Artscape. We did a show there, and you could see that there was a lot more white people there, because obviously it is obviously a venue in a space where it's majority white people. But then you think about it, and it's like, but yet they came to see us. That is still kind of significant, because they're hearing our stories, they're seeing our experiences, they're experiencing our art in a sense, and that is still a big magnitude of it. So then from that, then they will come to Zero, or they will come to some other places where majority of the people are people of color, but they're there for the art, they are there for the experience, they are there for transporting them from whatever situation they are in and feeling some sort of love, community, and joy.
Can I ask a question, maybe?
Yes, please. Yeah.
Because I'm curious about this also, because I mean, I'm born, bred, and buttered in Joburg, but I spend a lot of time here, and I have a lot of loves here, because I was a slutty bean. But it's important. I think I'm really curious about what big, huge spatial apartheid as sort of like events, like the Cape Town strike, like the taxi strike, like how did you experience or move or witness something that was that like clear cut, and how did that feel, especially for folks that were in Cape Town at the time?
Wild. It's funny because, like, so that day, when that strike happened, I was visiting my mom in Kuils River, and it was it First Thursdays? I think it was First Thursdays, right? And I had plans to, like, meet up with friends in town. And I was like, no, I have to go see my mom, because I haven't seen her, like, in months, and I'm a terrible child. So I go and I visit her, and while I'm there, like, all of this is happening. And so I live in Observatory, so I'm relatively, like, close to town now, right? So being there and being a freelancer, like, kind of, like, in town, I don't feel when these things are happening, particularly like taxi strikes, because they often, whenever there are things like this, everybody in CBD is like so chilled. And it's everybody on the outskirts who are like feeling the burn of it, right? Which is kind of ironic, because it's the decision makers and stuff who sit in the CBD who don't actually feel the impact of that. So it was really interesting being back home in Kuils River again when the strike was happening, and I needed to get back home, back to town, and then suddenly being like thrusted back into shit. I used to live here, and this used to happen all the time. Like, there were days where I literally couldn't go to work because, like, the N2 was, like, shut down. Like, there were days where, like, buses were being stoned. So we couldn't do that. And I think I think it's often a thing for me that I think about, that so often when we talk about Cape Town, we talk about this little isolated pocket, right? And then suddenly there's this massive impact that's happening around people who live in the northern suburbs, people who are living a little bit like sort of up the west coast, so like Tableview, Dunoon, that side, right? We don't think about those people. And particularly for queer people, it makes things like so much more difficult. We talk about things like Pride, when Pride is like solely like located like in the CBD. Like, what does it mean for queer people to want to celebrate that, but having to navigate all of those other intersectionalities of having to, just on a travel level,
Right.
to come through to town to be able to be visible and to be able to be celebrated and celebrate
And then
as well.
leave and be able
And then,
to leave.
yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry, that was a little bit of a rant now.
No.
No, that's amazing.
No, it was a struggle, because we were in rehearsals for AFAB actually at the time, and most of us had to travel there, and it was just like we were all like just up in the air, like, what are we doing? Are we still rehearsing? Are we literally risking our lives to get to a place where we need to rehearse and put up a show? And it's like, you have to just find your ways around it. And it's scary for a queer person, especially having to travel from, because we had so many different people coming from different areas. And it was like, do we do it? Don't we do it? But we had to sacrifice in a sense where they were actually like saying, no, we're going to create transport for you guys to be picked up, which is nice that they thought of us like that, but it was still scary in a sense of, you already feel like a target.
Right.
Now you even feel like more of a target because at the end of the day, me and Barry had experiences with being stoned in a car. And that is actually traumatic in a sense. So having to hear or see on social media of stuff like that happening, it triggers you in a sense of, I don't want to go through that again. Maybe it could be just my last experience, you know? So it was very traumatic, but at the end of the day, it was a glorious show. And we could celebrate at the end of the day knowing that we actually sacrificed a lot to be there.
Yeah. I mean, thank you for bringing that into the conversation, right? Because sometimes the conversation around queerness doesn't go far enough, and I guess this is part of the critique of the gay capital of Africa, where the conversation does not take into account people who don't live in the city, right? People who have other intersectional identities that make it difficult to access queerness, as it were, right, in the spaces that are in the city. And I mean, you brought up the Pride, right? And the contestation around Pride has been ongoing about why does Pride have to be in Greenpoint all the time, every year, right? And why doesn't it shift to other places that other people can access? And I suppose that is, an ongoing kind of conversation and critique. But then it also, that question, and I mean, in the history of apartheid geography that we still struggle with, makes one think about, well, maybe the first thing, community, right? We talk about a queer community, but clearly, I suppose we're talking about many queer communities, right? That are fractured, right, by race, class, gender, geographical location. But then we want to talk about community, right? Community is important to us, and we invoke it a lot. But linked to that, I wonder if, particularly with these features or these other ways of identifying, could we talk about solidarity? Right? How do we create a sense of, across these bridges, if you want, or across these different ways of being and seeing, or situatedness, right? Where we have a kind of solidarity, which I think what the opening of this book is alluding to, that it's not there, right? If we describe, if the gay capital is being described as alienating, and then there's somewhat a lack of a solidarity within.
Yeah, I think it's also that we tend to not want to be boxed, but yet we as the community box ourselves because I want to be this way, I want to be that way. And I think that is also where we cannot find solidarity, because we tend to want to portray, oh, we are one, but yet we are so divided in such a big way that we cannot find the links with one another. And I think that is where we need to go forward, is actually just finding or stripping all the labels and starting over. I think that is a big statement to make. That's a big statement to make, because even with me in my drag community, it's like there is this sense of saying sisterhood, sisterhood, sisterhood. But then when you look around you, but now where's my sister? Why is my sister not here for me? Why is my sister not holding my hand? Yes, you may say that you're my sister, you're my sister, you're my sister, because that is, we've been programmed to just call each other that. But we don't know the heaviness and the weight of what that word means. Even today as well, I hold friendship even on a high regard, because I do believe that not everyone knows the true value or meaning of friendship or sisterhood or community.
I'm really interested in like two aspects. Now that you talk about solidarity, two aspects of community or community building that we don't really like to speak about that as much, and that I feel are pretty relevant to Cape Town.
Right.
And migration or citizenship, like that area, and then age. I think that will really separate, I feel, a real sort of like poverty of relationships across generations. I really want elders, like proper, you know? And I also, like the relationships with elders that I do have, that I do treasure, and the conversations that we are able to have, a lot of the times it's like elders want us to and need us too, especially to navigate this really strange space of like language evolving and like identities evolving and all of these things that are going on very quickly, or at least in conversations. But then around citizenship, I really want to, and solidarity, I want to kind of invoke and bring in the like activists like Delavi Papadi, who's a Ugandan, incredible Ugandan choreographer, dancer, activist, etc., who's been doing incredible work around the anti-homosexuality bill that Museveni passed, and that was such an incredible shock that I felt in the facets of community that I have access to. And what was beautiful, at least in Johannesburg, was how quickly we were able to mobilize across class, across difference, across citizenship to kind of band together. But what makes me nervous about that is then we set a precedent of solidarity only in crisis.
Right.
And I get it. We're in crisis in so many different ways. And I love when that does happen, how the myth of South African exceptionalism is like exploded quickly.
Yeah.
Because we like to think of ourselves as like, you know, we're the ones, you know. And it was conversations and deep, deep community work and the failings of that sort of community work that were really important for me to move through and grapple with and fail at and want more.
Thank you so much. Do you want to go, Zoe, or?
I don't know. I don't know. It's weird. I have sort of like mixed feelings about community. And I'm partly saying that because as much as my life is extraordinarily public, I am deeply, deeply introverted. So being around human beings for me is taxing. And when the quota is done, babes, the quota is done, and I don't want to see another person like footsack go away, right? And as a queer person, and as a queer person who works in like activism, so I do a lot of work with like queer organizations, right?
Right.
The idea of the work is very in solidarity, very community-based. And because of that, the work is collaborative. And because of that, it's exhausting to me, you know? So when we talk about stuff like being in solidarities in times of crisis, because that's often the moment, you know, when we're like, hey, we need each other now, come through. And then when the times are good, then we're chilled and we're like, and then when the shit hits the fan again, then we're like, hey, we are my friends, bruh. So it's this weird thing for me where I deeply want to be in it. And I deeply want to be in solidarity, deeply want to be in community, deeply want to create spaces that are safe, create laws, policies, things that are inclusive, that are human rights-based and stuff. But that costs me something. And I think for so many people who sit as marginalized in whatever way you are, right? It always costs us a little bit of something to move forward. And the question I keep asking myself like all the time is like, okay, like how much am I willing to give now?
Right.
And then I'm going to give now. And then I'm going to give again, and I give again, and I give again. And I'm getting things back, and it's really, really wonderful. But as somebody who doesn't get the energy from being around people, from that geest, I mean, you know, people who are extroverted get that. That's how they thrive. But as somebody who's deeply introverted, I I struggle with that. And sometimes that's often met with, sorry, this is now very, very deeply personal in sort of like the spaces that I work, and it's the thing that I've been struggling with. That's sometimes met with a, you don't want to be here with us. You're not in solidarity.
Yeah.
You can give a little more. And yes, you can always, but it's that, the cost, you know?
Right. Yeah.
Like, is the juice worth the squeeze kind of thing?
Yeah.
And that's the thing that's a constant, like, I guess, back and forth that I have all the time.
I want to jump in also, because now I'm like, whoa. I think there's also something interesting to be said about gender here, you know? That, and inside of communities that where we aren't always doing the work of being together inside of a living room, touching each other, feeding each other or whatever, like the consciousness raising, which I look at with such romance when I read about bell hooks and like consciousness raising in people's kitchens and shit. Fuck yeah. But like, yes, because like, I mean, my love language is like, let me cook for you, you know, like let me feed you. That's how I feel love and give love. But I think that there's something really interesting to be said, and this is when I get personal, because I'm like, okay, I want to hold hands with you. There's like very certain members of the community where we want things from, and it's usually femmes, like, that we like want to put femmes to work. And it's like, but we ask more of femmes. We ask femmes more often to give when the social battery, the neurospiciness isn't spicing today, like across ability also, and like deep sense of disability, ability, all of that, and across the board. And I'm sick of this in such a deep way. And also like even amongst gender non-conforming people, non-binary people who present in a particular way. I present in a particular, deliberately. I'm a Trojan horse. Okay? I'm out here being like, oh, okay, yeah, you think that I'm frivolous and you like the space buns and with the high cheekbones and the baby face, and then I open my mouth and you must listen, you know? But there is a particular, like I was asked, back to that 2015, 2016 Flawless moment, the people that were making sandwiches looked a very specific way. The people that were in the front chatting, toy-toying, chimurengering, zweing, also looked a very particular kind of way. The people that were interviewed, visible, also looked a very particular kind of way. The people that were theorizing on the movement, writing books on the movement, also looked a very particular kind of way. And now the people that are asked to account for that movement, like solidarity, community, why didn't we do more or whatever, people that look a very specific kind of way.
Right.
And I wanna, just flag it.
A little bit
All right. Thank you so much for that. There's so much more to be said here, and I want to jump in, and I mean, I remember so well that 2015, 2016 moments, and the troubles around there, and the wager, right? The idea around the wager, I think is also an important thing. But I do want to get to the audience so that there's I'm sure you are dying to ask questions. But before we get to that, one anecdote. I remember when the statue was removed. I was there with my friends, people who are also at the institution at the time, and the crane came and removed the statue, and immediately, the black man within the movement jumped on top of where Rhodes was. And I thought the symbolism is insane. Right immediately after Rhodes was taken off. So that's the one anecdote to speak to what you're talking to here. And then the other thing is, the question around solidarity and I suppose the difficulties of it. And I think, all of you are alluding to this, but I think, one wants to make it explicit that, the queer struggle is a working class struggle. The queer struggle is a feminist struggle. The queer struggle is, and I think that kind of articulation does not get the kinds of traction or analysis as it needs, right? It says, and the problem of that, of course, is the way in which queerness gets shaped as white, right? And existing in particular kinds of articulations as, shaping it as, the gay capital. Because if you're going to say Cape Town is the gay capital, and then you're going to say, well, Cape Town is so white, then what is the correlation, right? Anyway, questions. I see one hand over there, and then another one in the green top, and then another one right here in front. So we'll take 3 for now and see how we do with those. Thank you.
Hello, everyone.
Hello.
I don't know how to even articulate the question that I have, but it's around class, it's around spaces, particularly in Cape Town. I've been in Cape Town way too long in the queer spaces. I know it's different speaking about going to Joseph Stone as someone who looks like me, black, right? And I know there's contestation around, is a colored person a black person or not, right? I'm not even going to touch that, right? So someone like me going to Joseph Stone and being in a space, I don't feel comfortable, but not because I am uncomfortable. It's because the people around me who usually frequent a space like that make me feel like I'm not belonging to the space. Then we have spaces that like looking at Janine down there, who creates spaces like on a monthly basis, like the Pink Party, right? Which, when I go to it, it's an array of different faces and different races and different classes. How do we then think about a space, but also considering our own safety in a space? So I don't know whether that is a question, but it's maybe something that, what questions do we have to ask ourselves to then create these things of solidarity? I also have the feeling about we don't really have solidarity. Because just like me also, I just want to be at home by myself with my own thoughts, but I also want to be part of a community. So how do we then do those things all together?
Thank you. Can we have the other question, please? I hope you're keeping them.
Keeping them here.
Oh, damn it.
All 3 of you.
I'm just curious, how about we go building a queer community that holds people accountable for their actions? Because I find far too often that in the queer community, we are so quick to create this community and not understand people's actions in it, especially those that harm other queer members. And I know that people would rather just gloss over it and be like, yeah, this never happened. When things are very real and real shit happens in these communities, how do we go about holding people accountable without stripping them of community?
Thank you. Last question here in front, please, before we engage.
It's a really good question.
Yeah, very thick.
Yeah.
No puns.
Hi. I just on the last thing that we spoke about, especially, I just wanted to ask how, just like if any of you have thoughts on how we have better conversations about sort of like the care work that has to go and that is involved in like facilitating community, but then also not so much in public spaces, but also just taking care of each other in more private spaces. Because like care work is incredibly difficult, and is often expected by certain people kind of like automatically. And yeah, so I just wanted to like hear what all your thoughts are on kind of having better conversations about how we like allocate the care work, who needs to do the care work, how do we like make sure that that's kind of happening equitably, and also like making sure that people who need people who like have higher needs are be able to have those needs met, and just that like it doesn't, so we don't like burn everyone out, kind of just like forcing everyone.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you. Please, anyone, everyone. Whichever question.
Well, I think if I can just jump on your question, for me it's also we need a lot of self-awareness to also understand if we have problems within ourselves, to articulate that. Because oftentimes for myself, I tend to not speak about my problems because I tend to think of it as weakness. And that is such a horrible trait to have for myself because it's to the detriment of my own well-being. So I think we should really look within and be aware of others as well as be aware of ourselves. And I think self-care is probably going to come from that when we all start knowing and seeing and looking through people and say, listen, I can see you going through something. Let's go have a chat. Even if it's in the club, even if it's wherever, just say, listen, let's just go have a chat. And take the person somewhere outside and then just speak. Because oftentimes we tend to not look at people because we have our own things going. And we need to be there for one another, truly and fully.
I think I want to get to the accountability question, but it's also a way of getting into the care question. I think we can't even start talking about accountability if we're not honest about power. And I think we have a really hard time being honest about power. Mostly because I think that we don't really have a lot of models to talk about power. And because we don't know really how to talk about power, people that have power and then abuse it inside of our communities, we have no idea how to deal with that kind of rupture. I'm thinking about like my own community and what led me to write my book. I was assaulted in the winter of my 21st year by a white queer who was from Canada, and I invited to SA, and they stayed with me for 6 weeks. We had 4 weeks in Joburg and 2 weeks in Cape Town. And it was really interesting to me, weirdly. And also, before I speak more, like it's always hard to speak about an assault, and if you need to like be okay or leave or you feel triggered, like please do everything that you need to do to be okay. It's hard, the shit. But my first huge obstacle, once I realized what had happened to me, was an incredible sense of shame because I felt like I was breaking up my community by telling people in my community what happened. And I saw it happen in real time because in breaking and puncturing that silence by saying not only was I assaulted, not only was this an act of sexual violence, but also it happened inside of community, and it was queer sexual assault. It's very hard for me to even make a bid for care inside of my community because I didn't even know what had happened to me, if it could happen to me, because of the giant discourse that says that violation looks one specific way and like survivors or victims look one specific way and perpetrators look like the danger is in very obvious places. So I really don't know. I think right now I'm looking very deeply at the work of scholars in disability studies that I feel have a lot to teach us about care. So, yeah, I'm full of questions and full of hurt and full of hope also, but I think that we need to talk to one another. That's where it starts. And we can't talk to one another in a city where we are physically kept from one another, which gets back to that moment of you being in a different environment as a black person, but then feeling a particular kind of surveillance because we're dealing with legacies of anti-blackness. Decades, centuries. And I don't think we're gonna tackle that like in 5 minutes.
Yeah.
Do you want to add something, Zoe?
Maybe a sort of linking thought, I guess, for me. So the questions are interesting, right? Because the conversation that we're having right now, and this, I guess is always the thing about queerness, is that the intersections are so many and varied and interlinked and intertwined, but also very separate sometimes. But so the questions are complex because they don't ride on like one factor, right? So we're talking about, if we're talking about what does it look like to create safe spaces, what does it look like to hold one another accountable, they speak to multiple facets. So that's about class, it's about your economic standing, it's about your social standing, it's about education, it's about the political system. These things are deeply, deeply complex, right? And so to go, okay, that for me is the fix, and we should do more of that. And like you, I have more questions than I have answers for stuff. I don't know why the fuck I'm on the panel. Like, I'm the person asking the damn questions. So it's weird. The position is weird because how do I then begin to address all of these little, these moving cogs in this giant machine just in order to hold somebody accountable, for example, right? One of the things that for me, had started doing, and I'm really, really glad I learned this, like very sort of like in my early like adult life. You know that saying about you can't make a horse drink the water, yeah? Yes, we know this saying. The part of that impetus is that human beings will do what human beings will do. We will do the things that we, for ourselves, feel are the best decisions for us in the moment in which we make them. We do this all the time. Do I want to go to X place? I make a series of like things in my brain and go like, okay, yeah, that's a nice place for me. I like the people there. Okay, the drinks are liquor there. Okay, I'm going to go there. Right? All these processes are happening all the time. We make the best decisions for ourselves. Even in community as well. We're looking at ourselves in relation to the thing. We see the world through our own lens. And so the real agency that we have isn't about the external stuff. They're about ourselves. So when we talk about things like exercising and practicing self-awareness, what does that look like? What does that actually look like? And part of self-awareness is being aware of other people, being aware of the spaces that you're in, being aware of the power dynamics, right? So that's just like one little thing. So when people ask questions like that I don't know how to answer, the only thing that I can say is that we have to model it. We have to model it. We can't make it external. We have to physically manifest it for ourselves. I don't know, I'm using that word very like...
Chakra.
not in that sense. We have to physically do it. So if we're talking about something like accountability, right? So what does that look like to model accountability? That means maybe talking to a friend when they say something that makes me feel a little bit funny. Maybe that's reflecting on myself when I say something that's funny or when I do something. And often I think it's part of the reason I love the pink party so much. I walk into that space and I can feel the value that's being modeled in that space, and it just makes me want to go and have a good time. And it's an interesting thing. It's why we gravitate towards people who have like good energy. Or we gravitate to people who are like, it's nice to be around them. And they're so nice. They're modeling the things that they want in their life for themselves, and they're surrounding themselves with people, with values, with ideas that make the world the way that they want to see it. So I don't know how to answer your question, but a huge part of that is personal accountability and self-reflection and stuff. And I think that cascades into how you make decisions, what spaces you occupy, which talks you go to, you know?
Like these ones. You've all shared some really, really amazing things, and unfortunately, time is always an enemy. But I think, first of all, we could have like 2 more hours of conversation. And I mean, so Frankie, fix this.
There's like a massive clock right there.
So as we move towards the end, you know, I think that part of the reason I think you're all here to have this conversation is because part of the politics that we're talking about, you live them, right? And to kind of take from your last point there, that it's not enough for the politics to exist as theory. We have to live them, right? They have to be embodied, these politics that we talk about. And I think that's really important for us as queer people, even as in a way to practice care, right? I will ask Maneo to close us off by reading this gem, Letsatsi. If you've heard it before, well, you're in for another treat. If you haven't heard it yet, brace yourself.
I'll do anything for you, baby. Yeah, I've been at this festival for a while. Hey, people know things about me now. Love that. I really love that this is now the third time that I've read this poem here, and it's wonderful to kind of feel why that might be, and not know, but like have my suspicions. So here's Letsatsi. In your mother's red Golf, you ask her what Benoni means. Son of my sorrow. Hearing the sun instead, you turn the word over in your mind like a coin. Ghosts are living in mind dumps as your mother drives you home. Honeycomb mountains are brittle. Tomorrow, you ask her for a crunchy after school. Like all names of the Bible, Benoni sounds ancient. Out your mother's mouth, magic, menjik, magic. You are still small enough to hide inside the good book's rice paper pages. You do not know yet what you are. Have not had Leviticus angled at you like an ice pick. For now, the Bible is a hand drum for women draped in white and blue. Kokatlehong, in a pockmarked garage, there are women made of clouds and ocean. They make terrifying, sea-wide music. Skupu, the plastic bottom of everything that has a heart, shells and bottle tops on ankles, how neatly old and new gods sit together. In school, you meet a man named Cecil John and learn the word pioneer. Turn the word over in your mind like a coin. Your mother is a witness. Your mother is a pioneer, not yet knocking on doors to tell people about the good news. You wonder if Cecil was a witness too. Wonder on whose doors he knocked, for which God, to spread what good news.
Thank you so much for that. Please thank my panel for me. This was amazing. Thank you so much. Right on time, 3 o'clock.
Yes,
Look at
overachievers.
that.
On the dot.